we say computer, we mean the electronic computer.
Hey guys, Bingocat here. So today's video is I decided I'm going to talk about the entire history of how I became interested in tech. That's right, the entire history of how I became interested in tech. So yeah, as of right now, my YouTube channel has over 441,000 views. That's right, 441,000 views, which doesn't even sound like that much considering how someone like PewDiePie can get millions of views per video, but to me that's amazing because I'm surprised my channel even got 1,000 views, okay? And in the last 28 days alone, I got 216,000 minutes of watch time. And I've also got over 76,000 views, which is once again amazing to me because I didn't even think I'd ever get 1,000 views. So to get over 76,000 views in just 4 weeks, to me, is amazing. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the entire history of how I became interested in technology. So that interest started out young. I was 1 to be specific when I became interested in technology. So when I was 1, my parents bought me a computer game. I have absolutely no idea what the computer game actually is, but they let me play on the computer when I was 1 year old. Now, my mom's computer back when I was 1 was a Packard Bell. It was running Windows 95. So that was sort of my first venture into computers. And after I started playing that game, I became more interested in computers. Like, I just liked watching my parents use their computers and turning it on and turning it off and the basic stuff. So back when I was 1, this was 1995/96, so Windows 95 had just came out. The web was brand new. Pretty much the entire idea of the internet and the web was brand new. So back in 96, we had dial-up modems. We had no broadband. Websites didn't take 5 seconds to load. To load just one page on a website, like a static web page, it would take 5 minutes to load, or more. It could easily take more, right? So yeah, also in the mid to late 90s is when AOL started becoming popular, but my parents never subscribed to AOL. So the next thing that I specifically remember that I kind of became interested in was I got a game for my mom's Windows 95 PC called Monster Truck Madness. And that game, for those of you who don't know, is a game where you just pretty much drive monster trucks around a racetrack. It was honestly a pretty fun game for its time. It had amazing 3D graphics for the time. Nowadays, those graphics are really, really bad. But those are amazing 3D graphics for the time, right? So yeah, I got a game called Monster Truck Madness, and I had so much fun on that game as a little kid. So skip forward to 1999, I was around 4 or 5 years old. My mom replaces her Packard Bell computer with a Dell Dimension computer running Windows 98 2nd edition. And something special to me about this computer is I actually got my own user account on this computer. On the previous computers, I was too young to have a user account, I guess, but on this computer, I got my own one. Now, it technically wasn't my own. I actually shared this account with my sister. The username was Kids, but nevertheless, this was still a separate account from my parents that I could use on the computer. Now, don't get me wrong, my parents could log in. There wasn't even a password for that user account, but still my own separate user account. So I did what any other young child with a computer in front of them would do back then and now. All I did pretty much on the computer was play games. But I also learned on the computer how to change your desktop background, how to change a font, how to change like the text title size or whatever. Basically, I started learning the basic functions of how a computer worked. I also learned how to launch computer programs, and I also learned that the thing called the internet even existed, and then I learned how to log in on the computer, how to shut down the computer, how to start up the computer. And my parents did show me a lot of this stuff originally, but by the time I was 7 years old, I officially became good enough, or for the most part, more or less, I could operate computers by myself. So when I was 7 years old, I started up a new school. So the special thing about this school was, unlike my previous school, this school actually had computers that the students could use. Now, my previous school was a private school. For kindergarten, I went to a private school. And it's not like they didn't have computers there, right? But they didn't have computers in any of the classrooms. Not even the teacher had a computer. And that school, and teacher wanted to record down grades or something like that, they had to do it in a book or something like that. Well, during my kindergarten year, they actually purchased a computer for the classroom. I think it was running Windows 2000, but I'm not too sure. I don't really remember it that much because the teacher rarely let students use a computer, and I don't think she really knew how to use a computer herself. So the computer during my kindergarten year was kind of pointless. When I was in first grade in my elementary school, the school was brand spanking new at the time. It had only been open for 1 year, and they had computers in every single classroom. And it wasn't just one computer, right? In grades kindergarten through third grade, they had 3 computers in each classroom. And in grades 4 and 5, they had 5 computers in each classroom. And they also had a computer lab with about 20 computers in there. And then the library had a couple of computers. So basically, there was computers everywhere in my elementary school. And so in my elementary school, the teachers and educators apparently did actually see the future of where technology is headed, because we had a lot of computer-based learning in elementary school. Like, they taught us basic stuff like, how to browse the internet, how to create a Microsoft Word document, how to draw pictures using a computer, and how to do proper research using a computer, stuff like that. And only when I was like 7 years old too, right? And honestly, I do feel like I could have figured out a lot of this stuff on my own, but some of the kids were practically, sleeping in those classes. They weren't interested in computers at all, but that wasn't me. I took huge interest in pretty much doing anything on the computer back when I was around 7 years old. I loved creating Word documents, drawing on the computer, just using the internet, stuff like that. And so, also when I was 7 years old, as my dad upgraded his operating system on his Dell Dimension, because he also had a Dell Dimension, to Windows XP. And so, on that computer, he actually let me have my very own user account, and he let my sister have one too. And so, yeah, Windows XP was actually the first operating system to even alert me to the fact that there are actually different operating systems. Before I was 7, I had no idea there was even a thing called operating systems. When I was 7, I learned that, there were actually things called operating systems, and that there was like different versions of Windows. And I even learned what a Mac was when I was 7. And so Windows XP, I liked it so much better than Windows 98. So once my dad got Windows on his computer, I started hogging my dad's computer instead of me playing on my mom's computer, even though her computer was, I think, slightly newer than my dad's computer, I guess. And so, yeah, I could do basic stuff like change the desktop background, simple stuff like that. And on my dad's computer, I guess I kind of started exploring the operating system by myself. Like, I figured out what the control panel was, and then, stumbled into like add and remove program, and I just started exploring the different functions of an operating system by myself. To me, Windows XP was almost sort of like a playground of the computer world. Like, I figured out how to do quite a few things on the operating system myself, and I honestly had fun exploring Windows. Now, once again, there were other kids my age who had, who weren't interested in computers at all. I mean, they would use them, but they weren't really interested in learning the different kinds of things you could do on them or how they would work. That wasn't me. I was 100% interested in learning about computers. And so I guess maybe one of the reasons I got so interested in computers is because both of my parents were programmers. Now, my mom stopped programming before I turned 7, but my dad, he was a programmer and still is a programmer, by the way. And so, yeah, sort of started learning about computers by myself. And so also when I was 7, right, you cannot forget cell phones. So when I was 7, I think it was around 2001, 2002, right? And both my parents got, cell phones, and they've had cell phones pretty much since I was born. And so they had like basic cell phones. Then that's around the time texting was invented. So back in 2001, 2002, all you could really do on your cell phone was text, call, and play Snake pretty much. They had Motorola phones, I think. And they didn't really let me use their phones except, to play the occasional games on them. But I remember I became pretty interested in phones and wanted a cell phone since a really young age. Now, I didn't get a cell phone until I was 13, but I've always been interested in phones and wanted phones. And so around 2003 rolls around and my dad gets a PDA. And the great thing about the PDA, it was a Palm and it had games on there. And the thing I liked the most about the PDA was that I could play the original SimCity on there. And so, speaking of SimCity, in 2003, we actually got a third family computer. Now, we had two in 2003, right? We had two Dell Dimensions, one with Windows 98, one with Windows XP. Well, they were both desktops, and that was a problem because we wanted a portable computer we could take places. So in 2003, we got a third computer, which was a Dell Inspiron 8500 laptop. Now, if you watched any of my previous videos, you might not have seen my video where I actually did a review on a Dell Inspiron 8500 laptop. That was the same kind of computer that my family had back in 2003, okay? And so with the new computer came new games. So in around 2001 or 2002, my parents picked up a CD game from the store. It was called E-Games Galaxy of Gold. And the games weren't, super or anything like that. But this is basically what you did before you had the App Store, okay? Is that there was CD that you could pick up in like Target or Walmart or even order off the internet that would contain like hundreds of games. And I think E-Games Galaxy of Gold Edition had something like 100 games on there. And so there were actually some pretty nifty little games on there like mini golf. There was a platformer game, almost kind of like Mario, called Speedy Eggbird on there, where you're this character who's in the shape of an egg and your goal is to get through like levels. And then there was, card games on there, things like that. But in 2003 rolls around, I get a game called SimCity 4, and honestly, that was probably one of the games that has addicted me the most in my entire life. The entire concept of SimCity 4 was just super cool to me. Oh, look, you can build your own cities. And I remember that game, I think I've played more than any other computer game. Like, seriously, I've played that game for on and off until probably 2015, aka when they released City Skylines. And so, it's safe to say that I really enjoyed using computers back when I was a little kid. Now, I didn't really learn any programming or anything like that as a kid, but I really enjoyed using computers and just exploring computers and figuring out, how they worked, and exploring phones and figuring out how they worked. Now, my main interest in computers, when I was a kid was, pretty much like any other kids, right? Games. I got my first email address when I was 10 years old. I actually do not have that email address anymore. But I got my first email address when I was 10 years old. It was a Yahoo email address. And so that brings me to the next point in my video, is when I was 10 years old. This was 2005, right? I decided to take a summer camp that would actually show me how to design my own website. Now, I had no idea that summer camps like this even existed until my mom told me that there was a summer camp where you could design your own website, and I was like, heck yes, I'm going to take the summer camp. I want to design my own website. So in this summer camp, we used a program called Microsoft Front Page, right? That basically allow you to design your own website without learning any coding or anything like that. So I didn't really know what HTML or CSS was back when I was only like 10 years old, right? And so I took that summer camp and we published a website onto Yahoo GeoCities because that still existed in 2005, believe it or not. And so, yeah, I had real fun doing that. And so instead of wanting toys or something for my birthday that year, I actually wanted Microsoft Front Page for my birthday so I could design my own website. Now, I didn't actually wind up getting Microsoft front page because it was too darn expensive. So my parents told me that, I could earn myself my own copy of Microsoft front page if I did like a chores chart, right? And slowly earned up all the money to buy Microsoft front page. But, as a kid, I didn't really want to work that hard just to get Microsoft front page, so I never wound up actually doing a chores chart for front page. And so I would say, as a young kid, like before I was 13 years old, I was very interested in technology. I didn't really get into programming or anything like that because I simply thought it was too hard as a kid. And so, also, this was before the days when, video tutorials became a thing, or back before Google was actually good. It was back during the days when you actually needed a book, to read stuff. To learn how to do stuff. Nowadays, you can just Google stuff or, search your stuff on YouTube, and there's already tutorials on how to basically do pretty much anything in the world. So when I was 13, I was addicted to a website called Neopets.com. And Neopets, it was a fun website. Still kind of is a fun website. It's just it really hasn't been updated since I turned 13. And so the special thing about Neopets was that it actually introduced me to HTML. And so I just want to point something out real quickly as I work in tech support, so I don't actually do any programming. But I guess being introduced to HTML and CSS sort of introduced me to the fact there's actually a backbone behind how technology works. Now, back when I was 7, we actually were taught the parts of a computer, but that didn't really mean much of anything to me. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, sure, I knew there were parts to the computer, but I didn't really know how they actually worked. And so, yeah, Neopets actually sort of introduced me to HTML and CSS, and unlike Microsoft front page, which designed a website for me, HTML and CSS sort of alerted me to the fact that, basically everything and anything that you do on a computer was controlled by code. And so I learned HTML and CSS to design my own pet page, which is basically just a website for each and every one of my Neopets. And so that sort of introduced me to the coding world, and that, all that the computer does is basically take commands that, are created by humans, right, and execute the commands. And so through HTML and CSS, I actually learned how to design my own website from scratch. And sure, I used a lot of templates and stuff like that other users put out into the community. But so I really learned sort of what made a website actually work. And that was really cool. So also at the exact same point in my life, I signed up to take a computer class in my school, a class devoted entirely to computers, right? And so I was able to learn, stuff like that viruses existed, that, more the different parts of a computer more clearly and detail, like basic cybersecurity, what email was versus what a website is, and, stuff like that, thanks to that class, I think I started to understand how a computer worked a lot better. And so after that class, I signed up to take a second computer class. And so when I was 13 years old, I started learning a lot more about different operating systems. Now, I already knew that there was things, that there were actually different operating systems, but it wasn't until I was 13 when I started actually using different operating systems, like outside of Windows, right? So my dad had just got a Mac at that point in my life. So I started learning that, not all desktop operating systems are the same. In Windows, if I wanted to change my desktop background, right, I right-clicked on the desktop background, and there was a button that said Properties, right? In Mac, on the other hand, it's completely different. Macs, as you may know, do not have right-clicking enabled by default. So it confused the heck out of me how to change a background on a Mac originally. So apparently you had to go into the Settings app on a Mac, right? And then you had to somehow find how to change the desktop wallpapers, right? I later found out that you technically could right-click a Mac and change your desktop wallpapers from there, but the Mac world was so different for me than the Windows world. And I don't know. It just boggled my mind. I originally did not like Mac nearly as much as I liked Windows. And to me, Mac was just confusing and hard to use. And so, also when I was 13, that was around the time when the original iPhone was released. And that is basically when smartphone mania started becoming popular. So, when I was 14, I got a 2008 second generation iPod Touch. And so I never had my own computer before this. I wish I had my own computer as a kid, right? But I finally technically had my own computer. Granted, it wasn't a real computer in this scope at the time, but an iPod Touch basically was and is a pocket computer. So I finally had my own device that I can play games on, browse the internet on, and it was awesome. And that's when I started learning, that, like, for example, that there's a difference between hard drive storage space and random access memory. Before then, I didn't know that. But then I actually started becoming interested in that kind of stuff. And so, honestly, my interest to technology actually kind of waned from when I was 14 through 16. I really wasn't actually interested in technology nearly as much as I was before. I guess, I don't know. My interest to technology kind of waned, but sort of restarted back when I was 17, when I took a computer programming class at my high school. And so that's when I feel like I started truly, I guess, understanding technology a little bit more, right? And so I took a computer programming class, and I wasn't that good, but I started learning the major difference between the command line interface and the graphical user interface. And honestly, that was pretty cool to me, because before then, I might have designed websites, but I never really programmed an application, right? And I just did some basic stuff that you're like programmed, I think, like an application that would tell you the time, and programmed, a window that would pop up and say hello world. And then me and my group members actually programmed a game in Visual Basic, a Halloween game. That was actually really fun. And so also in high school, I took 3 additional computer classes after that. None of them had anything to do with programming, but I took 2 computer engineering technology classes, which is basically, teaches you to be a tech support person. And so I learned what drivers were, I learned what the device manager was, I learned more in depth what the different parts of a computer are, what the different connectors on a computer are. And that class basically taught me how to become, the 2 computer engineering technology classes taught me how to become a Windows support technician. And then I also took a networking class. And that introduced me to the fact that, introduced me to different networking specifications, wireless and wired networking technology. I could go on and on about all the stuff I learned in that class. Now, I was aware, that there was what networking was before that class, what Wi-Fi was, what Bluetooth was, what Ethernet was, but I had no idea what 802.11.n meant before that class. Now I know. I had no idea the actual technical specifications between different types of Ethernet cables before that class. Now I know, right? And so the end of high school was rapidly approaching. By then, I still did not have my own computer, sadly, but I did get my very first tablet at that time. I had got an Android tablet. It was a Nexus 7 tablet. It was released in mid-2012, running Android 4.1 KitKat at that time when I first got it. And so I've already had several iPod Touches by then, but that was sort of my first introduction to the Android side of, mobile computing, right? And so finally, the end of high school comes up, and I finally get my own computer. It's something that I wanted since I was 7 years old, my very own computer. And I wanted to get a Windows computer, but when I graduated high school, this was 2013, and this is after Windows 8 came out. And I did not like the direction Windows 8 was going. Luckily, Windows 10 did sort of take care of a lot of my concerns in Windows 8. The thing I didn't like about Windows 8 was they basically built a mobile operating system for desktop computers, and I absolutely hated that. I wanted a traditional computer. And so Apple, luckily, was not really mobile-fying their desktop operating system too much. They were inserting a lot of apps from iOS into their desktop operating system, but that was alright. So I bought myself a MacBook Air 2012, which I actually still have. And so finally, when I got my own computer, I had the place where I could finally fully experiment on the computer all by myself. I could finally do whatever I want on the computer. And I did do whatever I want on the computer. I, dabbled in some programming, and let's see, I also figured out how to run virtual machines in there. I finally had a place where I could game, uninterrupted on the computer. And so I actually bought that computer for college. So figuring out what the major in college was, I guess the reason that from ages 14 through 16 that my interest sort of waned in technology as I became a lot more interested in architect stuff and interior design and things like that. And so when I was a teenager, I fully had my mind set on becoming an architect. I wanted to design houses. And my interest for that actually sparked playing The Sims 2, because I could design really amazing houses in The Sims 2 and The Sims 3 for that matter. And I had so much fun doing it. I was really engrossed in designing houses in The Sims 2 and The Sims 3. And so I had my mind set on being an architect. I even took 2 architect classes in high school. Well, no, actually, sorry. I took 1 architect class in high school. And then I took 2 drafting classes in high school. And I had so much fun with it. But unfortunately, the job outlook for the architecture field was extremely low. Like, they basically weren't hiring too many architects. So I decided, I already spend pretty much all day, using technology, and I've always been interested in technology. So why not major in a field regarding technology? And the other great thing about the technology field was that it pays a lot of money. And so my original college major choice was computer engineering technology. Now, I had no idea what computer engineering really was. And honestly, that was a bad move on my part, because since I didn't have any idea what it was, when I actually started college, the program was entirely different than I imagined it to be. I thought by just choosing computer engineering would be more, I guess, what the same of what I learned in high school in my computer engineering technology classes, aka how to be a good PC support technician. And I specifically took that instead of computer programming because even though programming interested me, programming also really confused the heck out of me and even bored me at times. So I decided I didn't want to be a programmer. And so I started up my degree program and sort of discovered that it isn't really all that I thought that it was. What that program actually mainly was being an electronics technician. Like, I would actually have to dive deep into computers. It would be very much hardware things, right? I have to dive in deep and find out, what parts of a component weren't working. Like, why, find out whether a capacitor on a motherboard failed, or, I also have to physically solder stuff together and basically figure out how electricity worked and how electrical components worked. And I'll admit, it was really interesting, but I just could not keep up. And I wasn't happy doing that program. So early 2014, I was 19 years old. I decided that, I took this program for a semester and I went into the second semester, which dealt with a lot more electrical components than they did in the first semester. And I'm like, this is honestly not what I thought that this field would be, not what I thought this degree program would be. I thought it would be more like my classes that I took in high school, not really, like putting together electrical components, testing electrical components, seeing how they work. I thought it would be, mainly I'd be on the computer doing something software related, like, I don't know, sort of administrating PCs, configuring PCs, stuff like that. I did not think that I would actually be physically, ripping out small components like capacitors and transistors, soldering them, actually having to know, dive deep into how electricity works and stuff like that. And so I discovered at my college that I could actually switch to a program called Computer Information Technology. And so I had no idea what IT was when I was 19, to be honest, which sounds pretty sad because when you're 19, you're an adult. And I had no idea what the heck IT even was when I was 19. I didn't even know that it stood for information technology, to be honest. But I thought computer information technology sounded pretty interesting, and it was exactly as I expected it to be. You pretty much became a support technician through that program, and you could also basically become, I guess, sort of a what they call maybe a computer architect. You learned, maybe not a computer architect, maybe like a network architect. You learned how to design like computer networks, and you learned how to fully service a PC, and you learned how to you learned like good computer security skills, networking skills, and basically how to be a technology expert without having to do too much programming or anything like that. Now, once again, don't get me wrong, I didn't mind programming, but honestly, it just boggles my mind a lot of the time. Like, I do not think I could just sit there for 8 hours and code all day. And so, yeah, when I changed over to that program, I honestly became a lot happier. And so also, when I was 19, I started my YouTube channel. And so, once again, my first video when I was 19 had absolutely nothing to do with technology. But one of my first videos actually did have everything to do with technology. So I became interested in running Windows 98 on my MacBook Air. And so I ran Windows 98 in a virtual machine and posted a video for you guys to enjoy. It's actually still on my channel if you go all the way back. Like if you go to my oldest videos, I actually deleted it originally, but I put it back up. And so yeah, when I was 18 and 19, I also got my very first smartphone. So this was like 2013, 2014. It sounds pretty sad considering how iPhone, aka the modern smartphone revolution, it kicked off in 2007. So to not even get a basic smartphone until 2013 actually sounds kind of sad. But nevertheless, I got my first smartphone, and it was so cool being able to finally access the internet in my pocket. And with being able to access the internet in your pocket wherever you want, you know, I started using my phone a lot more than I did in the past. Before I got a smartphone, I really wasn't interested in my phone too much because I didn't really text that much back then, and I certainly did not make any phone calls. And my dumb phones, or I guess they're still called feature phones or something like that, I don't know, I had a flip phone and then a slidey number pad phone. They didn't really do much outside of texting and calling. You could play a couple basic games on it, and you could write notes and stuff like that. One of them even had a camera, but it just wasn't that good. Now, when I got a smartphone and being able to finally access the full-featured internet on my phone, you know, excluding Adobe Flash, and I could finally download, you know, apps from the Google Play Store, because my first smartphone was an Android phone, by the way. It was like I was in heaven, having all access to all this information and all this entertainment just from my pocket. And honestly, that was awesome. And so when I was 20, right, I got my first job in this field. And so my first job, I actually still work in this job, my first job is mainly just tech support and system administration. So I'm the guy that'll make sure that the back-end systems and, you know, the PCs and the servers and stuff like that are running fine, and I'll set up, like, you know, new PCs for our users. And I'm also the guy that, you know, will be there if something is wrong. Like if you aren't getting any emails, I will be the guy that's sitting there and will be troubleshooting why you aren't getting any emails. And so by then, not only could I use technology, right, I also pretty much fully understood how technology works, or at least, you know, I understood a lot better. And so that brings me up to the last year when I was 21, and I finally started making YouTube videos again. And I started making YouTube videos on, like, you know, review videos on, like, my phones that I've had, and, you know, tablets and my computers that I've had. And finally did I actually have money where I could buy myself devices. Because before I was 20, I wasn't exactly broke, but I was saving up a lot of cash because I have to pay for college somehow. And now that I'm in my last years of college, it's safe to say that I have quite a bit of cash saved up, to be honest. And I can finally I'm finally financially comfortable enough where I can buy my own electronic devices without asking for my parents' help. And so when I was 20, I built myself my gaming PC, which is actually what I'm recording this on. And that was the first time I ever built a computer. So I feel like building a computer, by the way, really helps you understand the actual parts of a PC, like what's a hard drive, what's a graphics card, what's a motherboard, what's, Wi-Fi card, what a NIC is, just stuff like that. And I was so proud of my PC when I built it, seriously. After I built it, I would oftentimes spend like hours, like 8 or 9 hours in a row using it because I wanted to get my money's worth out of it. And so that actually kind of brings me to where I am today. So I am in my 4th year of college, and I am going for an information technology degree. And I'm actually going to college 5 years because I mentioned how that first year of college actually changed my degree program. So I'll actually be going to college for 5 years. And so, yeah, that brings me to where I am today. I make YouTube videos a lot. I still buy quite a few devices to play around with. And honestly, besides, learning about, technical stuff for school, I also do a lot of playing around with technology and stuff like that in my spare time. Like, I just bought myself a new smartphone called the Pixel XL, the 5.5-inch one. And I am so excited for that to arrive. And I also bought myself some new Bose canceling earbuds. And I can't wait for those to arrive either. And Google and YouTube and the internet has gone so much better ever since I was a kid. Like, if you wanted to search for a how-to video on how to use Windows back when I was like 7 or 8 years old, it was pretty hard to do so on the internet. Chances are there wasn't even a video. Nowadays, it's super easy. I can find it in about 5 seconds. And I love how influential computers and the internet has been to the world. If it wasn't for the internet, I wouldn't be talking to you guys today. And I do think the internet is one of the most revolutionary products ever invented. It's really allowed people to connect to each other, allowed, to find so much more information than you ever could just by going to a library. And in a library, you might have to shift hours or days through books. Or on the internet, you can find information you want in about 5 seconds or less. And to me, that's just really amazing. And it's amazing to me how you can, watch movies, listen to music, play games, and do stuff like shopping and banking. And, you can basically do almost anything that you could want to do on a computer or a phone without leaving the spot if I really wanted to, and I just find that amazing. And I think that's sort of why technology interests me so much as it is today, is all the stuff that you can do with it. It's just technology is just so amazing. And I think without technology, my life would have definitely been a lot suckier. I don't know how I would have been growing up. I think I would have been that kid that was into books a lot, and I was into books a lot growing up. But nowadays, I think at my age, I would have maybe been into reading a lot, playing board games definitely a lot more. I'll admit I probably would be going out a lot more if it wasn't for technology, which, would actually probably be kind of good. Like, I'd actually want to go to the movie theater to watch a movie. Nowadays, I don't, because you can stream movies instantly from the internet. Or I might, want to actually go out and buy, like, a CD with a song on it. But nowadays, I don't do that because, once again, the power of the internet is amazing. And so, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my complete history of how I got interested in technology, and I hope to see you guys in future videos. All the support you guys give me on this channel is awesome. So yeah, bye guys.